Hello everyone, and as always, thanks for watching. It's now the first week of April 2020, and as you undoubtedly know, a huge majority of the world's population is currently isolated from friends and family, to say nothing of entertainment and exercise options. Then of course there are the many concerns about jobs and paychecks, cleanliness and hygiene, sufficient food and medicine supplies, and of course the ever-present toilet paper hoarders. Even if you're in your 60s or 70s, most of us have never experienced anything like this, so it's perfectly normal to be worried. Whether you're worried about something cataclysmic and biblical like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or just simple basics like how we're all going to pay our rent or mortgages, we can all use a little extra hope and comfort right now, I think. So today I'd like to try to take this opportunity to talk about prayer a little bit, and maybe I can help to lead some of the lonely people out there towards the light a little bit. Specifically, we're going to be exploring a deep, immersive sort of prayer that you may have overlooked. Although this sort of prayer is of Christian origins and is centuries old, it may surprise you to learn that it is also akin to a total immersion meditative experience like you might only expect from an Eastern theology such as Buddhism, for instance. Whether or not you've seen any of my other videos here on YouTube, you should know that I place a big emphasis on confirming certain truths of our existence from multiple angles. I look for common denominators from sources that may seem like opponents, even enemies, truths that are common to factions on both sides of a certain fence. For example, science versus religion, or the occult versus Christianity, or Islam versus Christianity can be vastly informative. While many religions may seem primarily combative or even destructive to their competitors, they still have unique tools, strengths, and insights. So, contrary to what you might expect, confirming the truth of balanced opposites may actually strengthen our search for the ultimate truth. What's more, such balance can also help to eliminate various spiritual red herrings, if you will, or to put it another way, faiths and belief systems which are not in balance with the whole. While our goal here is a serious one of comfort and reassurance, and potentially even of enlightenment, it's worth noting that there are probably dozens of alternate scholarly and academic examples I could use to make the same point. Rather than make this into a lengthy, dry, tedious, or historical essay, I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief and simple, even a bit entertaining, I hope, by using a couple of pop cultural references to make an interesting point that I hope will help you through your days of social distancing and any other trials you may encounter in the future. Alright, so let's get started. Our first example is the daring and innovative cult classic sci-fi horror drama mystery movie Altered States from 1980. The movie is an audio and visual tour de force which many people consider far ahead of its time. If you've ever looked back in fondness at the sort of acid-trippy special effects from, say, 2001 Space Odyssey that made that movie huge, then you'll know what to expect from Altered States. Some say that the 40-year-old special effects still hold up well today, and considering the astounding technical levels of today's CGI, I think that's really saying something. In the movie, William Hurt plays the part of Harvard scientist Edward Jessup, who is obsessed with finding mankind's role in the universe. Now, I think I should warn everyone ahead of time that although the movie contains a number of religious elements, it's not a religious film, and one might say that it's not a particularly uplifting film either. Although the story is based on a novel, which is in turn based on real experiments, Jessup's conclusion at the end of the film certainly doesn't complement our goal of higher levels of prayer either. Although, to be fair, the plot's central premise of finding the ultimate truth of life is one I find really compelling anyway. In order to achieve his goals, Jessup uses various gurus and hallucinogenic compounds to enhance his search, and ultimately he even regresses himself genetically into a sort of proto-human monkey. But a major key in his journey, the one element that has a real-world bearing on our quest for peace through prayer and meditation, is his use of a sensory deprivation chamber. The first such tank was designed in 1954 by John C. Lilly, an American physician and neuroscientist. He designed the tank to study the origins of consciousness by cutting off all external stimuli. His research took a controversial turn in the 60s when he combined sensory deprivation with various hallucinogenics like LSD and ketamine, very much like in the movie.
No, Mr. Simpson. This is a sensory deprivation tank. It blocks out all the external distractions that bombard our souls.
Can you pee in it?
I'll take 2 hours.
Me too.
You're about to take a journey into the mind. You may see and experience things that are strange and frightening. But remember, they can't physically harm you, though they may destroy you mentally.
Oh my.
Fast forward to 2020, and we find that the popularity of isolation tanks is still in vogue. If you live in an urban area, it's likely that you can find a float center, a spa, or a similar business near you. A visit to one of these may very well provide you with a whole host of beneficial effects, and many of these benefits come with optimistic scientific research to back them up. An isolation tank is typically filled with warm salt water to give you as near a weightless sensation as possible. You lie down in the warm water, either in the nude or with as loose a fitting clothing as possible. A lid or heavy door is then closed, creating a dark, soundless environment. For this conversation, one of the most interesting results reported by users include spiritual experiences, deep inner peace, sudden spiritual insight, and feeling as if they were born anew. Sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it? Other testimonies describe hallucinations and various psychosis-like experiences as well. A wide range of alleged health benefits include improved cardiovascular health, pain relief, stress, depression, and anxiety reduction, improved concentration and focus, and improved athletic performance, among others. Spending an hour in such a tank is apparently even good for enhanced creativity. Some reports indicate that floating in a sensory deprivation tank can increase originality, imagination, and even intuition. I think it's worth mentioning a common Christian perspective at this point. Some believe that altered states of consciousness, those might even include sleep, drunkenness, or various types of drug use, leave a person open and thus susceptible to undue spiritual or, dare I say it, even demonic influence. It does seem logical that if you cast yourself into a very open-minded state in a sort of let's just see what happens manner, there's probably no telling what sort of influence you might invite. There's a reason why parents often insist that children don't forget their bedtime prayers. This concept certainly goes hand in hand with Ephesians 6:10-18, which urges us to put on the full armor of God through prayer. So, while the health benefits of isolation tanks have plenty of supporters, I think it's a safe bet that most Christian clergy aren't going to put this at the top of your spiritual awakening to-do list. So, if I haven't made it clear, although we can all use some peace, comfort, and relaxation in these trying times, our goal isn't just the glorification or advancement of the self, but rather to find and embrace a higher power to help us through. Granted, it's a fine line between the two, but I think it's helpful to make that distinction early on as we try to define and focus on our goals.
Feinstein is in the middle of his research. It's still experimental. The big discovery would be if those who use a float tank become so familiar with its quietude that they can access it even when they're not in the tank.
Okay, now let's take a look at our second rather unorthodox example. In the 1980s, actress and dancer turned author Shirley MacLaine received as much praise as criticism for her globe-trotting autobiographical book Out on a Limb, which was also adapted for television in 1987. Her New Age views on reincarnation, meditation, trance-channeling, and UFOs made her the butt of many jokes made by late-night comedians, but that didn't stop the book from selling like hotcakes or diminish the number of devoted fans who attended her subsequent spiritual seminars. I remember reading the book with a rather distant sort of interest. If nothing else, I just wanted to find out what all the hubbub was about. By the time she rolled UFOs into the mix, it was pretty easy to dismiss the entire thing as nonsense. There were simply too many disjointed concepts rolled into one fantastic version of reality for me. However, there was one aspect of her story that made a light bulb go off over my head, and it seemed like a pretty good bet that it was closely related to the movie Altered States and the sensory deprivation fad that was popular at the time. During one apparently pivotal juncture, MacLaine and her guiding friend use a hot tub to achieve a similar effect to a deprivation tank, with one major distinction. Rather than conducting their experiment in complete darkness, they use a candle as a point of focus. In the semi-darkness, the flickering candle provides not just a pleasant, mellow relief from the dark, but also a random movement that allows the participant to simultaneously relax and stay alert while aware of the spiritual task at hand. As wacky as her story seemed, it aligned in a strange way with portions of my own first-hand theological research and spiritual journey. The two essentially came together, and I recognized some very profound yet unappreciated similarities between her form of quote-unquote meditation, or pursuit of a higher power, if you will, and one of the most significant forms of prayer known to man. About the same time that MacLaine's story was being seen as a 5-hour ABC television miniseries, I followed an almost irresistible tug to go to the small village of Medjugorje in the former country of Yugoslavia. It was here that 6 local children had been experiencing visions and receiving profound messages from the Virgin Mary ever since 1981. These events were reminiscent of similar world-famous events that had taken place much earlier in such places as Guadalupe, Mexico in 1531, Lourdes, France in 1858, and Fatima, Portugal in 1917. When I heard that there were events of literally biblical proportions going on in the modern age, I knew I had to go. For the record, it has been during events associated with the Virgin Mary that some of the biggest and most famous miracles in history have been recorded. It was the apparition of Mary to Juan Diego at Guadalupe near Mexico City that produced the miraculous tilma, one of the most incredible artifacts in all of Christianity. The tilma is Juan Diego's rough cactus garment upon which Mary left an image of herself that has perplexed experts for over 450 years. Featuring incredibly small and precise details and pigments that cannot be identified, it has defied all attempts to give it a natural explanation. More incredible still are the events from Fatima, a name that in Christian circles is virtually synonymous with dire prophecies. Beginning in the spring of 1917, 3 shepherd children began receiving visions of a lady more brilliant than the sun, who promised a miracle so great that all would believe. Among many astounding messages, they were told that proper prayer would bring peace to the world and an end to the Great War, which we now call World War I. Various estimates say that somewhere between 30 and 100,000 people gathered in the quarter known as Cova de Iria on October 13th to witness the promised miracle. After a long period of heavy clouds and rain which drenched many of the onlookers, the sun indeed came out and was seen to dance and zigzag across the sky. Many people feared the sun was about to crash to earth. Other reports included a panorama of colors, patterns, and visions of Jesus and Saint Joseph, among others. More amazing still, many claimed that as the sun was exhibiting these miraculous events, their clothes became suddenly and completely dry, as did the wet and muddy ground. Miracles like these, seen and experienced by 100,000 people, is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. Such an event certainly provides us with a very important benchmark from which we might measure not only competing faiths, but also other forms of prayer and meditation as well. When I traveled to Medjugorje in Yugoslavia in the spring of 1988, I was relatively aware of the extraordinary sorts of events that often accompanied Marian apparitions, even though I was far from being an expert. As a cocky guy in my 20s, traveling to a turbulent foreign country, I certainly had no reason to expect any special or personal revelations, and yet they happened anyway. Suffice it to say that this would be a far too long a video if I told you everything that happened in Medjugorje, but we often joked that it was like a Disneyland of miracles, and I wasn't particularly comfortable with such strangeness. The first night there, we were awoken in the pre-dawn hours by a group of very excited people who were watching lightning going up from the peak of local Mount Kruževec. Almost every day after that featured an unsettling event in which someone had a grand epiphany or miraculous event. One woman in particular, who I have long assumed to be some sort of Shirley MacLaine follower, had a particularly tearful breakdown when she realized that the quote-unquote mother of power she was seeking was fictional at best. A few days later, while standing at the top of that very same peak, I suddenly felt uncharacteristically nervous, as if I had an IRS audit or a court appointment the next day. When I mentioned this to my friend, he said, "Yes, I feel it too. You're going to get, quote, zapped today, and I'm going to get it tomorrow." Needless to say, I was a bit, well, apprehensive. As thousands of people waited and prayed around the beautiful church of St. James for the time of Mary's daily appearance, I sat between 2 of the girls in our group. Despite my misgivings, I was trying my hand at praying the rosary. A slight breeze blew across the grounds then, and I joked that was Mary. She just blew in. When I returned my attention to my rosary, moments later, the chain link where my fingers were laid had turned to gold. Among the many incredible miracles that happen in Medjugorje on a daily basis, this was the first one for me, and suffice it to say, I got a bit emotional, but it was only the first of many to happen. The next morning, I found that my second rosary had also turned to gold without me even touching it, and later that day, as we prepared to leave, my friend was indeed zapped just as he predicted, and his experiences were even more amazing than mine. If you are the scientific, logical, or even atheist-minded type, I don't blame you a bit for being skeptical. I've been there. So you may find it then interesting to note that one of the women from our group returned home to a disbelieving husband who insisted that the rosary get tested by a lab, allegedly to prove to her that the gold tint was some sort of scam. The surprising results came back with a sort of good news, bad news scenario. The bad news was that the newly formed material of the rosary was not the element gold that science was familiar with, but the good news was that the material couldn't be identified, similar to the pigments of Juan Diego's incredible tilma. Without getting into complex discussions about the deep traditions, dogma, or power of the rosary, I think it's important to recognize the amazing similarities between these three different approaches to peace, guidance, and fulfillment. As we saw, the key to a sensory deprivation tank was isolation, and thus the ability to eliminate distractions so as to focus completely on a goal. By isolating yourself from real-world interruptions, you can in turn isolate your mind from worries and complexities. Shirley MacLaine and company combined this idea with a candle for focus and a transcendental meditation mantra for a richer, more extended experience. The rosary uses the best parts of both of these methods to unite your soul to the maker and keeper of all. No UFOs required, and you don't need to leave your house or even your car to pray them. On the simplest level, you are saying well-known prayers of biblical origin, such as the Our Father and Hail Mary, like someone chanting a mantra might do. On another level, you are counting the beads to keep track of your progress. This adds a simple physical action to the process, similar to the flickering candle that keeps you alert and focused. On a third level, you are focusing on bigger Christian ideals, including joyful, glorious, and sorrowful themes such as the Annunciation, the birth of Jesus, his death, and resurrection. This is a truly immersive type of prayer with a virtually unparalleled history of, shall we say, miraculous response that requires no tanks, no water, and no membership.